What's up, Guardians? J-Man here, and today we're getting controversial. For years now, I've seen members of the community state that hand cannons are overpowered, too easy to use, and should be nerfed. In this video, I'd like to provide evidence as to why that is a complete misconception, and argue that hand cannons are a high-risk, high-reward archetype that only skilled players can take advantage of. To start, where does this misconception even come from? Why do people think that hand cannons are overpowered to begin with? The first reason is probably from folks looking at usage data from third-party sites like Destiny Trials Report. New weapons work their way in and out of the most used archetypes, but there will always be a hand cannon or two on the list. Even in this crazed immortal meta, Ace, Crimson, and Rose have managed to wiggle their way into the top 10. And the second reason comes down to what type of player is actually using these hand cannons. Now, we don't have access to all of the weapon usage data available, but we do have an interesting breakdown provided by Trials Report from October of 2022. On the left-hand side are highly skilled players with a 2.0 KD or higher, and on the right are more novice players with a 0.8 KD or less. Looking at the 2.0 KD side, we see Hawkmoon, Ace of Spades, Austringer, and Palindrome. And if we take a look at the 0.8 KD side, there's only a single hand cannon, Ace of Spades. So it's safe to assume that the main type of player using a hand cannon is one with a higher skill level. But between hand cannons always finding a way into the top used archetypes, and those using hand cannons being highly skilled, you can imagine why a casual player might complain about hand cannons being too strong. But that is not the case at all. Let's start by talking about time to kill. Using the infamous Destiny 2 weapon stat spreadsheet, we can compare both optimal and body shot TTKs across all weapon archetypes. Now, if we start with hand cannons, specifically the more popular 140 RPMs, we see that their optimal TTK, or 3 perfect headshots, is 0.87 seconds, which is just considered average. But if we look at the body shot TTK for 140s, it goes all the way up to a very, very long TTK of 1.73 seconds. So this means that hand cannons are very unforgiving. A single miss of a crit shot can potentially double your TTK and is devastating. Now let's compare it to other weapons. Let's start with pulse rifles. If we take a look at the Messenger, a pretty popular pick, we can see that the optimal TTK is 0.67 seconds, so less than hand cannons. And the body shot TTK is 1.6 seconds, which is also less than hand cannons. So not only can pulses outrange hand cannons, but they can also kill faster and are more forgiving. Pretty similar story for auto rifles. Let's compare it to Amit, which can be crafted as a god roll. Optimal TTK of 0.67 seconds, a body shot TTK of 1.07 seconds, both faster and more forgiving than hand cannons. As you would guess, same exact story for SMGs. Optimal TTK of 0.77 seconds, body shot TTK of 1.1 seconds, both faster and more forgiving than hand cannons. Scout rifles really aren't popular in the Crucible, but still, a hung jury has faster and more forgiving optimal and body shot TTK. And lastly, we have sidearms. Let's take a look at Drang. 0.6 optimal, 1 second flat for the body shot, both better and more forgiving than hand cannons. Now, there's a lot more to this, and we're going to cover more topics, but generally speaking, hand cannons not only have the slowest TTK across the board, but they're also the least forgiving, and a tiny slip-up can dramatically increase your time to kill. This leads us into the next topic, Flinch. As we just mentioned, any miss by a hand cannon is detrimental to the engagement. So getting flinched on a hand cannon in many ways will guarantee a loss. But getting flinched while using an SMG, or an auto rifle, or a sidearm is not that big of a deal, because you can bring that automatic firing weapon right back to the target. The gap between optimal and body shot TTKs of all other archetypes is not that large, so getting flinched really isn't a big deal. The same exact concept can be applied to airborne effectiveness. If you take a hand cannon to the air and get bad in-air RNG, you're ruining your TTK. But if you take an SMG to the air and miss a shot, it's really not that big of a deal. Another problem hand cannons are suffering with is other archetypes sneaking into their intended range. So one thing you might think is, well, if I want to beat an SMG user, I can just stay back and outrange them. Well, let's take a look at some range stats from D2 Foundry. A max range Rose has an ADS damage fall-off start of 34 meters. So generally speaking, you want to be within that range to do the maximum damage possible. Now let's compare to a max range Immortal. Now we're seeing an ADS damage fall-off start at close to 24 meters, just a measly 10 meters shorter than the Rose. And if you pair that Immortal with Peacekeepers on a Striker Titan with Shoulder Charge, it's pretty easy for them to close the gap and win. But the problem is, when using a hand cannon, you can't really backpedal too much. Because if you do, you're putting yourself at risk of pulse rifles. A max range messenger has an ADS damage fall-off start of 42 meters, clearly outranging a hand cannon. So by using a hand cannon, you're basically caught in this range limbo, and it really limits your playstyle. If you take one step in the wrong direction, you'll either get melted by an SMG or sidearm up close, or get destroyed by a pulsar scout from far. And we haven't even talked about special weapons yet. Hand cannons don't have the range to always flinch snipers, and they don't have the body shot TTK to contest shotguns and fusions up close. So all of this brings me back to my original point. 1. Hand cannons are not overpowered. In fact, they're arguably the worst weapon archetype to use in the Crucible right now. And 2, those who do use hand cannons do so for the high risk, high reward that they were once able to achieve. Now, if you ask me if I think hand cannons should be the best archetype out there, simply put, yes I do. A sandbox where the most forgiving weapons are also the most powerful weapons shrinks the skill gap. And I think it's safe to say that we proved that hand cannons are the hardest weapon to use, so therefore, they should also be the best. We should be incentivized to take a high risk and receive a high reward. And to achieve this, I think there's a few weapon archetypes out there that need both a range and body shot TTK nerf to even things out. Guardians, that will conclude our video for today, and I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments. Do you agree and feel that hand cannons are too weak in today's sandbox? Or do you still somehow think that they are overpowered and need a nerf? If you enjoyed the video, a like and sub to the channel is appreciated. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the Cosmodrome.